Welcome to our Where Are They Now video series. I'm your host, Tom Rue, and in celebration of our 20th anniversary, we are sitting down with past seed grantee founders, usually 10 years out or more, to catch up on their accomplishments and activities since receiving the grant. And today I am joined by Paolo DiVincenzo. Paolo, I'm sure a lot of people tuning in know you in the ecosystem for a multitude of companies. Our connection to you was through a company called Arcametrics Systems, which was a 2012 seed grantee, if memory serves. And it was basically an ad firm with predictive consumer modeling technology and was sold to MediaMath.
That's correct.
Right?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it started as more horizontal than vertical, but as we looked into different verticals, we decided the application that was best for it was in ad tech, and specifically to identify consumers with a high probability of converting on any specific advertisement, which, as you can imagine, is pretty valuable in the ad space, particularly if you can do it with enough efficiency to run it over sort of the real-time bidded exchanges that are out there for advertising.
Now this, just stating the obvious, this was pre-AI, so to speak, which back in those days, we would talk about terms like algorithms, right? I think that was the euphemistic term we used pre-AI to do like predictive modeling and things like that. Was that in fact what Arcametrics did? Like, did you have proprietary algorithms that just poured over tons of, kind of consumer behavior data to do predictive analysis?
Yeah, I mean, the function that you're talking about was the same. So we were poring over gobs of consumer data to find, the best audience to be targeting. We were not using algorithms. We were using neural networks to do it. And, much more sophisticated, but much heavier overhead in terms of the processing, right? Which nowadays probably wouldn't be a problem, but back in 2012 definitely was. So our secret sauce was being able to do that sort of processing quickly. And so, I can't claim credit for this. This is very much our CTO, John Turner, and our head of product, Brad Davis. And they were running multiple iterations to get this done, but they kind of figured out how we could do that in an accurate enough way that was also lightweight enough to be, usable by the big ad networks.
I love that word enough.
I think, yeah, little asterisk.
I just think this is it's funny because, we deal with so many first time, entrepreneurs that are just on that journey that would be almost passe looking at your CV. But that's something they get caught up on, right? Like perfection. They strive for that last 1/10 of 1%. And you're just like, folks, man, get it into the market first, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's good enough to get there.
At the end of the day, you're selling shirts with banner ads, right? And so if something goes a little bit wrong, it's okay. And when we were looking at different verticals, we were looking also at financial services. We were looking at medical technology, things like that. You need a higher degree of accuracy, right? But given where we were trying to participate, we just didn't need it to be 100%.
Yeah. So you've owned and managed and sold multiple internet-based businesses since the late 90s, if my research is accurate.
Yep.
And I'd be interested to hear a little bit about that. But the first question I need to ask, I don't believe you're a North Carolinian native, like myself. I am just a kid from Cleveland, Ohio, down here for about a decade now. So what's your origin story to the state? What brought you here?
Yeah, so I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, actually. Went to college at University of Virginia, met my wife there, and her family's on the East Coast. And so we've kind of stuck to the East Coast for the most part. I originally relocated down to Raleigh from New Jersey, where I was trying to get a business off the ground. It was a really tough place to do it, and intentionally picked Raleigh because I figured it would do much better down here than it was doing up there.
What do you mean from a kind of entrepreneurial ecosystem standpoint, or was it just access to capital or talent?
Yeah, some of that, mostly talent actually, because what I needed a bunch of developers. I needed a lot of space. It was an e-commerce holding company, right? So I had a warehouse, I had a call center. We were developing on multiple platforms. So I needed lots of labor and I needed lots of space. And trying to do that, up in New Jersey, with the high cost of everything on top of sort of the high cost of living and, insurance and income taxes and everything else you're facing up there, I decided that this would be a much better place to do it. But 80% of the formula was in the talent. I bought a house right next to NC State. I put my office right next to NC State. I hired NC State grads. So it was really, a lot of it was driven by the talent at NC State.
That's convenient. As somebody that grew up in the Bay Area, did your master's at the University of Chicago, again, if research bears out, was over in New Jersey. I mean, like, you have been around. And so for you to have all those experiences, places in the country, to pick North Carolina, specifically the Triangle, that's quite a testament. Especially, this would have been what year was it that brought you here?
I think 2004 or 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this was really, 2005 is when NC Idea was born, and this was still very nascent in the kind of technology-based economic development practices, and trying to put talent, capital, and, other ecosystem support systems together. So you really kind of came in at the time this was all really taking off.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I say it to this day, like, I think it's a phenomenal place to operate a company. Like, there's incredible talent here with the 3 universities. Cost of living, it's higher now, but it's, comparative to the Bay Area or the New York area, it's much lower still. So I'm a big fan when it comes to places to operate companies. It's the fundraising environment's challenging, obviously. It always has been. So, it might not be the easiest place to get a startup off the ground where you need gobs of capital. But if you're looking to operate a company profitably, this is a phenomenal place to do it.
Yeah, I've heard that, and you're right. It's getting more expensive, but it's all relative. My sister lives in Menlo Park, and so whenever I go visit her, it's like, a house that would go here for about $400,000, theirs about $4 million.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Once in a while, I'll think to myself, I work in tech. I'm a Bay Area native. Like, what am I doing here? But then I go back and I, look at the life there, and I think I'm okay here.
Same. I enjoy visiting here, but I could never live there.
Yeah, exactly.
So, as I said, you had just multiple successful exits. I think this is a true statement, although I'll leave myself wiggle room in case a fact checker out there says otherwise, that we funded you in 2012 and you exited in 2014 with Arcametrics Systems. I think that's kind of a speed record for us.
Yeah. And candidly, it wasn't a phenomenal outcome. Like, we sold the company because we needed to. Like, we raised a seed round. We got our initial technology off the ground. We had some revenue coming in. It wasn't enough revenue to clear that Series A hurdle that was out there at the time. So, recognizing that we didn't want to raise a bunch of money on a business that was not looking VC scale, we decided to go ahead and exit it, while we were still on solid financial footing, had some phenomenal partners that were using the technology successfully, and could, get a decent return back to our investors before they had put in too much.
Okay. So you had raised some private equity prior to that point, but just not, you didn't see yourself at that escape velocity for the Series A.
No, it wasn't happening.
Yeah. And that's okay, right?
It is okay. And, and I'm thankful that we preserved some optionality to be able to have an okay exit, that we didn't, raise an insane valuation, and be in a position where what we had to offer strategic acquirers was far less than what we had invested in the company.
Okay, so here's your second kernel. Your first was the enough, and here's your second, like a decent exit, right? Because I think, in this space, the narrative is so dominant that it's almost a binary discussion, right? You either get a 10, 20, 30x multiple, or you flame out.
Right.
And there are so many deals that, just have so much positive impact that are in between those two extremes.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's enough narrative in this space, about singles, doubles, and triples, right? And even acqui-hires, there's still a place for that. And it continues kind of, feeding the tree of entrepreneurship, so to speak, in the region. Um, you know, again, I look at how many times you bought and sold and were involved in that. What would you share with the listener around that concept? That, like I said, you were very thoughtful in how you chose to exit Arcametrics and the reasons for it. I know you also were part of a acquisition that was like 150 million, right? And I think that was iPlace. Um, you know, how does that informed your thinking? And I'm leading the witness here because I'm gonna turn your answer into advice for others to consider. Because at some point in these conversations, I like to pick your brain on behalf of the aspiring founders that like look at you as inspirational and say, I want to have that kind of a track record. So what advice would you give, I guess, to anybody that's going through the private equity cycle and how they think about what they raise and when they raise and from whom do they raise?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think thing A is define your objective. Like, what does a good outcome look like to you? And for me, it was never about having yacht money. Like that was never important to me. What was important is being able to have a career in entrepreneurship because I honestly love it. I love my job. I want to stay in it and able to stay in it. I need to stay solvent. And then, having enough to feel like I'm building towards my retirement. Like that's pretty much it for me. Right. And if that's it for you as well, don't feel obliged to take a moonshot if you'll be happy with something smaller than that. So, I think that's the first thing. And then I also feel like every business sort of has a natural fit out there in the world. And, sometimes it's a huge VC scale business and sometimes it's just not. But I encourage all entrepreneurs to, make make sort of capital efficient experiments, get out there in the market, find buyers, do these things that will help them find their fit in the market. And if that fit happens to be, okay, we've got this is very much a feature, not a product. We're getting our sales through tight-knit partners. Maybe this ends up being $5 million exit, then so be it. But make sure you sort of maintain your optionality to have an exit like that. If that ends up being sort of the natural fit for what you've got.
Capital efficient tests, I think is what you suggested. That's an interesting piece of advice. I think it's spot on. And I use the qualifier interesting in the sense that today in the age of AI, I think doing those kinds of experiments and testing has become a lot, dare I say it, easier.
Yeah.
I mean, let me just ask you in a general sense, and then let's take this answer to segue into, what you're currently doing with Inorganic and OpsAssembly. How do you see AI impacting potential, trajectories for startups? And just in general, what does it mean, to start a company in the age of AI?
I mean, I think it does two things. It makes things much more efficient, right? So things that were harder a couple of years ago are much easier now. But on the other hand, it makes things much noisier and more crowded. So I think there's always, whenever I see a new startup and it's, clearly built on AI, I ask myself, well, how many other people are doing this exact same thing? And so, from that perspective, I think the competition is much more fierce. The market is much more crowded. There's a lot more noise. On the other hand, it's easy to spin things up. I really like the application of AI sort of behind the scenes in maybe businesses that are not wholly reliant on, GPT or something, but are using it in the background to fuel things that were previously much more difficult. Like I'm really bullish on that. Use case is kind of obvious to me on how it benefits the companies. But in terms of what's going to happen with all these GPT wrappers out there, I think there's going to be, just like the .com days, what happened there, there's going to be massive fallout. There's going to be some winners. And then the real use cases are going to become clear to us years later.
Yeah, I can relate. We had sold one of my last companies to VC out of Chicago, GTCR. It was a $160 million roll up. They were buying a bunch of similar boutique agencies like ours and custom app dev shops. And we were the poster child for the .bomb crazy, like economic metrics be damned, right? We had like a $4 million a month negative burn rate, and nobody cared because we were just going to IPO and everything was good. Everybody was going to cash out and everything was going to be great until it wasn't, right? And then
Yeah.
reality sits in. And it was funny because at the time when we sold, we took the majority of it in cash, right? And we were the last company in, and we even got mocked by some of the previous companies because they took like an 80-20 equity and 20 cash. We did the opposite.
Yeah.
And 22
Hindsight.
months later, when everything was being shut down, and the VCs are like, yeah, I was last man standing. We had 600 employees at one point in time across the country. And yeah, crazy times. I'm digressing on that. Before we jump into the current, I kind of failed to ask one question that I've been trying to make a habit in these interviews, and that is, how did you get connected to NC Idea, right? I will be 10 years in this job this March, but you predate that. So I'm always fascinated to understand, like, how did you connect with us?
I can't remember exactly when I learned of NC Idea, but prior to the Arcametrics application, I had submitted another application. So
Oh, really?
I mentioned this e-commerce holding company that I had moved down to Raleigh. We had built some tools internally to run that company, and one of the tools was for managing data feeds. So it had always been in my mind, wow, maybe we should spin this out as a separate thing. So I submitted an NC Idea application to do that very thing. I was denied, but Lister Delgado, and this is still, I tell everybody to this day, this is the most friendly no I've ever gotten in my entire life. He called me and he was like, hey, I thought this was interesting. You didn't make the cut, but I'd love to sit down and have coffee with you and learn a little bit more about your business. And so he and I had coffee. He gave me a few tips for the next application, which I think helped us with Arcametrics. But more importantly, was there to sort of help introduce me to other people in the ecosystem, as well as give me feedback on a product I was trying to commercialize. So
Yeah, Lister's
that's how I
a
learned about
sweetheart.
the idea.
Yep, Lister's a sweetheart, and so is John. And you probably knew David, then my predecessor, I should say. It was a tight crew back then, and I can always follow up with Lister to ask, but my guess is, was it related? You made an impression with that first application, and the fact that he showed the curiosity, to take a meeting and learn more. I know we see this now when we have, companies that come through either seed or micro, because micro didn't exist in your day, but we'll see like just not yet. I mean, close, but not yet. And so when that reapplication or that next application comes in, we remember the founder.
Yeah.
And I bet you, anything that Lister remembered you fondly, so that when the Arcametrics app came in, that probably gave you quite a boost in the evaluation and the decision to make that deal.
Yeah. And plus he gave me some great tips. Like I remember one thing he said, which we absolutely did in the Arcametrics application, was he said, we don't like to just fund operations, right? We don't like to just, here's $50,000, go do whatever you do on a day-to-day basis with that $50,000. He's like, we like a project that, has a beginning and an end, and $50,000 covers it. And that's pretty much what we spec'd out with Arcametrics, and we ended up using the funds for exactly that. Like that $50,000 was our first product. Like we got a product off the ground with that money, and that was super important to our evolution.
Yeah, and that was a good model that stands pretty much today, right? We still more or less use that and other criteria, but we do want to see, this money help you scale, right? It's to get, early market traction, validation, something that shows, you're about to hockey stick,
Yeah.
so to speak. And I think it's been a great model that's, it's 20 years in, we're still using that formula. Let me ask you, I know it's a little bit of a patentedly silly question, silly in the sense that somebody of your accomplishment, to think back quaintly on before you were the accomplished individual you are now, like what were the things you wish you knew when you started on this path, when you decided, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur and I want a career in entrepreneurship? What did you wish if you're today, you could talk to the you of 30 years ago or whenever you got onto this path, what would you tell them?
You know what? I think when I first started, I used to sort of cling to industry standards, which I realized like weren't that important later. The big one for me was products versus services. Like I definitely grew up in an era where services were a no-no. Like they're messy, they don't scale, they have low margins, blah, 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 blah. But over time, I've learned that they can solve, when you lay them on top of products, they can solve big problems for those products. Namely, they can solve churn if you improve onboarding and, add managed services and things like that. And B, there are some phenomenal service models out there that, stand on their own without products, and they're, highly investable and scalable businesses. So I think, that's just one example, but sort of those, dogmas of entrepreneurship that I used to cling to, like, the more I let go of those, the more options I see out there.
Do you think that's just a byproduct of aging and maturity and just surviving what at the moment feels like an existential threat to your existence, and then somehow you muscle through it and you realize the next day, like, oh, the sun still came up today?
I mean, that's a lot of it. And just meeting more people and seeing more businesses and just having more data points to draw from. When you come out of an MBA program and you sort of take the textbook examples as, the right thing, you have to unwind some of that with experience, I think, over time. And so, just seeing phenomenal businesses that were pure services companies, for example, firsthand, like I learned a lot through that. And then having some experiences where I solved problems by adding services to products, like, that's coming out of the other end of that, I think, helped me with my thinking there.
Well, the reason I asked you about what would you advise, the younger you, is because I think that segues into what you're doing now, and specifically probably more so with OpsAssembly. You want to talk about what's currently occupying your days?
Yeah. So I've have this platform in Organic, which is for helping it's helping startups find strategic acquirers, right? And the bulk of companies that come to the platform are companies that have raised a little capital, built a product, haven't found enough traction to raise a Series A. If this sounds familiar,
Mm-hmm.
and need somebody to basically provide a home for the company. So in doing that, I've seen a lot of companies that weren't getting the traction they need to get to the next level. It occurred to me, though, strategic exit is only a viable option for some of them, right? There are others where the best option for them would actually to be, focus on getting their financial footing, focusing on doubling down on a niche where they've been successful and growing the company. And so, to find an option for those companies, I formed OpsAssembly, which is basically a group of operators who come together to advise startups on what they should do to get past those hurdles they're facing.
And what would you say the biggest misconception that people have? Like, so I don't know if this is more to inorganic or opposite, probably a little bit of both. Somebody coming in and like, maybe, hey, I've been at this for 12, 13 years. I'm just treading water. Maybe it's time to sell. Like, do you ever bring somebody in through the inorganic because they think they just want to have a strategic acquisition brokered, and then you go, well, you're not going to get the economic outcome, and maybe you need to knuckle down for another 12 months so that you get to this baseline that then puts you in a better position? Would that be a fair continuum?
Absolutely. And it was happening more than ever because the M&A market is really challenging right now. And it has been for like 3 years, right? So people would talk to me about inorganic, and I'd look at their business and I'd be like, listen, honestly, you might have a 20% chance of success using the platform. But I like your business. Some of these companies had serious revenue, were very close to cash flow neutral. And you could see that the only thing that was holding them back is they had taken a round of capital. They had gone way too broad, trying to scale way too quickly. And if they were to just narrow down and focus on the fundamentals, they'd be okay. So I'd say, hey, listen, rather than use this platform and waste 6 months of your time trying to get to, 20% odds of an outcome, what I would do is I'd do this other thing and I'd focus on the business and build it up. And maybe when things thaw in M&A, you'll be in a much better position. So I was saying that more and more, right? And finally I was like, well, listen, if I'm talking the talk, I should just pull together some people and we can walk the walk. And that's how we started OpsAssembly.
Yeah, there's yet another pearl of wisdom. You said that, they're in that position because they took too much capital,
Yeah.
which forced them to go too broadly. And that's now the challenge, their growth, ironically, right? Because allegedly we take that capital to expedite and accelerate growth, but people often forget, the strings that come attached to the expectations. I wanted to tease that out, double click on that. Cause again, you just let it go. That's like tacit knowledge to you, but that's like really good advice to, again, somebody that might be listening to this episode.
Yeah. I mean, when you take capital, you're sort of signing up to a certain playbook, right? That capital is to be used for scaling, not so much experimentation. I realize there are some angels and other folks who are fine with you experimenting and sort of figuring out, where this company is going to go. But most investors expect you to scale with that money. And so what happens is people scale prematurely or they scale too broadly because they're just grasping at anything that'll deliver revenue. So, between those two things, you can actually find viable businesses that are maybe not VC scale within sort of the clutter that is created from these forces that are put in play when somebody takes capital.
Yeah, you just made me remember a thought of my own, very young, much younger me, the first time I was out trying to raise money. And I was sitting across from a, very high net worth individual that was looking to be an angel. And I gave him my business plan, which back then, if you were printing in color, it was like $1 a page. And so I had this very fancy, like 40-page business plan. And he just goes through past all the fluff and puff right to the finances, right? And like I was doing my pitch and he raised a hand. He's just like, just be quiet for a minute. And he looked at it and then he just closed it and put it down. And I said, well, what? He said, listen, no offense. This is a work of fiction. And so the only thing close to being true is what you say you're going to spend, right?
Yeah.
And that is always understated. So I double that number. And then I look at what you project, which is always overstated, and I cut that in half. And if the economics still make sense, I'll go back and read your fancy pages. But in this case, it doesn't. And he could see that I was miffed, and I think he saw it as a teachable moment. He said, and the other thing you need to understand, young man, the more money you take, the less control you will have.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes those options you were talking about earlier, like a small exit, it takes them off the table, right? And there was an illuminating moment for me when I was trying to raise a Series A for Arcametrics. I met with this investor up in New York. It was a regular old VC, so it wasn't an angel investor. And he took a look at my business and he said, you have decent traction, which we did at the time. Like we were clearly ramping in the right direction. And he's like, this is what I see happening with your Series A. I invest my Series A. You continue with this path you're on, which is basically plugging into these platforms as sort of a white label service provider. You're going to get, decent traction doing that, but it's not going to be escape velocity. One of those is going to step up and want to own the IP, and they're going to acquire you for, let's say, $5 to $10 million. And I was like, yeah, wouldn't that be great? We're going to exit for $5 to $10 million within a couple of years. And he said, not great for me. Like, this is the math I need to get a return on this investment. And he kind of walked me through that very kindly. And that's when the light bulb went off, is like, VC is great for some things, not great for other things. And depending on what you plan to do with the business, you should very much deprive yourself of VC if it's not going to work for them.
You are just dropping knowledge bombs everywhere. You should try to deprive yourself of VC. That is, I couldn't agree more. It was funny. One of our ecosystem, very successful exited entrepreneurs, Joe Colopy, just dropped his book called Bootstrapping Bronto.
Yeah.
And he was actually one of the first 10 years ago, first folks that kindly took a meeting with me when I was just the new guy in this job. And, he shared with me his story of Bronto and, just kind of the clawing and the grinding and getting it to that point. And just the epiphany he had when he had that first offer, right? And what that felt like when he turned down, 40 million, 50 million. You can by the book and get the exact figure. And like every time he turned down another, 30, 40 million on top of the previous, like he realized that like, hey, we did this and we did it without, you know, bringing in external capital. Now, I know there's a few in the capital stack that are probably a little disappointed that they weren't able to participate in that exit. And that's the discretion of the founder, right?
Yeah.
And nobody forces you to go raise private equity.
Yeah.
And in
I mean,
fact, it's
the first, I think some of that was formed by the first exit I was a part of was that one you mentioned, the $150 million exit of iPlace, which by the way, I had very little to do with. Like I was brought in after the company was founded. I think they were, I was employee maybe like 15 or so, but I was brought in to head up product and marketing. So they brought me in to do that. But the CEO, he came from a traditional business background. He wasn't brought up in the .com thing. He had a successful exit under his belt in that world. And then he ported a lot of what he was doing over to the .com space. And he ran that company like a regular business, not like a .com. And, investors we were ramping really, really quickly. Investors were trying to throw money at us. He was saying no. He did take a strategic investment at one point, but it wasn't a lot. And that company very much grew, from profit. And it was one of the reasons like we survived and a lot of companies around us didn't.
Yep. So our producer, Christian, has given me the land the plane warning. So I like to close these out by really, again, taking advantage of having you here in the hot seat with everything you've accomplished. And let me just say again, how lucky we are you chose, North Carolina and the Triangle specifically to really grow this empire and success you've had. So what would be your kind of advice, your, closing thoughts to founders out there today, looking to do something similar to what you've accomplished?
I think, start with the end in mind, which can be a little bit controversial because when you talk to investors, they're like, don't think about the exit, don't think about the exit. But how you capitalize the business is really important to what kind of outcome you're expecting. So start with, what success looks like to you and build the business from there.
And, I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to take that privilege here and ask you just, I didn't mention this earlier. What would you say about, building your network? I mean, you mentioned a few names already. Like, how important is it to have the right people around you while you're trying to build something like this?
I mean, I think it's incredibly important. And I think that's definitely one of the assets that we have here in the Triangle is that, there is a pretty tight-knit community. I feel like, since we are a little bit underdogs, people stick together and they're like truly, truly helpful. And, I've used that time and time again, to find the right hires, to find the right co-founders, to pull together something like OpsAssembly, which is, probably 80% from the Triangle and very much people I've come to know through, various events and whatnot around here. So I think, it's a resource that you can leverage. And as an entrepreneur, you should be leveraging every resource available to you, especially the free ones, like a network. So, definitely build it while you have the opportunity.
Yeah, I spoke at a function out in Wilmington, and one of the things I shared with the audience is that entrepreneurs are some of the most generous people that I know because they have empathy for those that are trying to do something similar, and they could be up to their eyeballs in other priorities, but will, more often than not, still take that call to help somebody else that's coming up in a similar fashion. And I think you exemplify that as well. So with that being said, Paolo, thank you so much. Congratulations on all the wonderful success. Please continue to be successful and inspirational to others. And remember your family here. So if we can ever be helpful to you, you need only reach out.
I appreciate it, Tom. Thanks so much.